Thank you. The next item of business is a debate on motion 16511 in the name of Kate Forbes on protecting the powers of the Scottish Parliament. I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Kate Forbes to speak to and to move the motion. Up to 11 minutes, Deputy First Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On the 4th of July last year, a new Labour UK government was elected on a manifesto commitment to reset relations with the devolved governments. Few could fail to welcome this ambition and the chance to turn the page on the disastrous legacy of the previous Conservative government. Brexit delivered a double blow to Scotland. First, we were taken out of Europe against the wishes of the majority of Scottish voters. But then, Brexit was used to justify the systematic undermining of the powers of this Parliament, a Parliament which the people of Scotland voted for in a decisive referendum result a quarter of a century ago. Most significantly, that undermining came in the form of the Internal Market Act. Presiding Officer, let me briefly remind the Parliament what the Internal Market Act does. It was passed without the consent of the Scottish Parliament or of any devolved legislature. It introduces far-reaching and unpredictable new constraints on the powers of the Scottish Parliament. It provides UK ministers with an open-ended power effectively to nullify laws passed in this chamber. And it enables UK ministers effectively to unilaterally alter the competence of the Scottish Parliament and Scottish ministers by allowing currently excluded matters to be caught by what are called, and I quote, market access principles. In this last respect, let me set out the threat here. It's clearly a possibility, at the very least, that the next UK government will be a right-wing administration that's hostile to the NHS funding model. Just this month, the Labour Health Secretary said this, and I quote, Nigel Farage would introduce an insurance model and charge patients to use the NHS. So the UK Labour government itself believes the threat is there to the English NHS. But this is where the Internal Market Act becomes dangerous for Scotland. Because Schedule 2 of the Act allows, at the stroke of a pen, a UK minister to bring, and I quote, healthcare services provided in hospitals and other healthcare facilities in Scotland within market access principles. In other words, if healthcare services in England are opened up to much greater private provision, then we in this Parliament could be powerless to stop that same process here. This Act, therefore, is like a ticking time bomb under Scotland's NHS, one that could be detonated at any time by an ideological right-wing government at Westminster. And that threat needs to be removed. The Internal Market Act must be repealed. Presiding Officer, the previous UK government insisted that the Act was necessary to protect internal UK trade, that it merely replaced the market rules we had when we were in the EU. That is not true. In place of broad legal principles of mutual recognition and non-discrimination, balanced by proportionality and subsidiary tests, and sensible derogations for important policy outcomes, such as public health and environmental protection, the Act introduces rigid statutory requirements which apply automatically and in nearly all cases. It is flatly untrue that the IMA is necessary to protect intra-UK trade. And it is perfectly possible to create a balanced, proportionate and rules-based system of regulatory cooperation if there is goodwill and political imagination on all sides. That's what we've been trying to achieve through positive engagement with the other governments of the UK on the development of common frameworks. Now, it's not just the Scottish Government that is clear that the Act must go. The former Welsh First Minister Mark Drakeford described the Act correctly as, and I quote, smash and grab on devolution. And less than 18 months ago, the Labour Party in Scotland was clear about the threat the IMA poses when it backed a motion calling for repeal. In the debate of October 3rd, 2023, Neil Bibby said, and I quote, and I hope we'll hear from him later in this debate, he said on October 3rd, 2023, the Conservatives passed the UK Internal Market Act 2020, even though the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Senedd withheld consent. Members will recall that my party, he continued, the Labour Party, voted against that legislation here in Scotland and in Wales. We also opposed it at Westminster, he said. That makes it all three parliaments because of the implications for devolution and concern about the market access principles. The Scottish Labour Party's assessment of the Act's impact on devolution is just as correct today as it was in October 2023. The risk the Act poses to this Parliament and to policy innovation is felt across Scotland. Organisations from NFU Scotland to Alcohol Focus Scotland have made the risks plain. Just last month, Scottish Environment Link called the Act, and I quote, entirely unfit for purpose, and that it, I quote, works directly against the principles of devolution. It warns of, and I quote, years of inertia, delay and uncertainty if the Act's impact on devolution is not addressed. And against that background, the UK Government last month announced a statutory review of the Act. But despite the profound damage it does to the powers of the Parliament, there was no substantive engagement with the devolved governments or devolved legislatures on the scope and terms of reference of the review. The preferred option of both the Scottish and Welsh governments, repeal and replacement with a fairer, more transparent and actually workable system of regulatory cooperation, has been unilaterally ruled out. As matters stand, we still face the prospect of laws passed in this Parliament being nullified at the stroke of a pen in Whitehall by whatever administration is in power. We still face... I will.
Douglas Ross.
I'm grateful to Kate Forbes for giving way. She's speaking about bills that were nullified by the UK Parliament. One of those was the Gender Recognition Reform Bill. John Swinney, sat next to her today, said he had no regrets about supporting that bill. I know the Deputy First Minister didn't vote on it, but does she support the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, which her First Minister still does?
I stand along NFU Scotland, Alcohol Focus Scotland, Scottish Environment Link, Scottish Crofting Federation, all of them who state that the fundamental principle at the heart of the IMA, irrespective of what issue is at stake, is that it has undermined the powers of devolution. We are accountable to the people of Scotland. There will be disagreement across these benches on the matters that are under debate. The point is that those that are elected to this Parliament that are accountable for the decisions that we make, and that should stand without a minister from another government unilaterally overthrowing laws that are passed by this government. And I think I've answered the member's point. As matters stand, we still face the prospect of laws passed in this Parliament, irrespective of what members across this Parliament think, being nullified at the stroke of a pen. And we still face the prospect of those powers being diminished without its consent. The consultation document does recognise some of the damage done by the previous UK Government, and the consultation document rightly proposes that common frameworks, intergovernmental mechanisms for regulatory cooperation underpinned by agreed principles, including respect for devolution, represent the correct approach. But the development of common frameworks has been greatly impeded by the introduction of the IMA, further strengthening the case for repeal. Presiding Officer, as matters stand, the Act's market access principles apply automatically in nearly every case, impeding sensible discussions on managing divergence and acting as a disincentive to seeking and agreeing proportionate, sustainable solutions. We stand ready to work with the UK Government and other devolved governments to deliver a better system, one that removes the unnecessary, unworkable and undemocratic constraints the Act has placed in the Scottish Parliament. And we believe a better outcome is easily achieved. It's entirely possible to devise a system of regulatory cooperation which provides certainty to businesses, consumers and citizens, whilst also respecting devolution. In this respect, the IMA has demonstrably failed to deliver any of the ambitions set out by the UK and devolved governments in the agreed 2017 Statement of Principles. In particular, it does not, and I quote, respect devolution and the democratic accountability of the devolved legislatures. If the UK Government is serious about making common frameworks the means by which we manage regulatory cooperation, then it has to start by setting out how its proposals will meet the agreed principles which underpin those frameworks. And more fundamentally, if it's serious about respecting the decisions of this Parliament and indeed the Welsh Senate, then it should repeal the Internal Market Act. It is baffling that not only has the UK Labour government refused to repeal the Act, it's ruled out even considering repeal or even repealing any part of it as part of the review process. Devising a better system requires trust, mutual respect, a willingness to listen. And the UK Government will find a ready partner in the Scottish Government if it is prepared to approach the issue on those terms and to ensure that the powers of this Parliament are restored in full. So, Presiding Officer, as I close, I acknowledge that it was a Labour government that legislated to establish this Parliament. That followed an overwhelming vote by the people in September 1997. I don't believe that all those people who voted and wanted our new National Democratic Parliament to be permanently here wanted it to be at the mercy of arbitrary and unaccountable decisions made at Westminster. So the new Labour government has a decision to make. They can show that they're committed to the democratic principles which underpin the Scottish Parliament, indeed the democratic principles that Neil Bibby lauded in his comments in October 2023, or they can demonstrate that they're happy to squander that inheritance and endorse the disastrous legacy of the last Conservative government. Today, I hope this Parliament sends a strong, unified message in the name of Scottish democracy, and I move the motion in my name.
Very good.
Thank you, Deputy First Minister. I now call on Rachel Hamilton to speak to and to move Amendment 16511.2. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Here we go again, debating the so-called protection of the Scottish Parliament powers. This is now the second time in this session that the SNP have brought forward this grievance-led debate, rather than focus on the pressing issues that matter to the people of Scotland. The last time we had this debate, nothing changed. Nothing will change after today, except that once again, valuable parliamentary time has been wasted when we could have been addressing valuable parliamentary time. If Kate Forbes can tell me why we are not discussing health and education and all the issues of crime that they are failing Scotland's population on, yes, I will take the intervention.
Deputy First Minister.
Well, I would hope that the member does understand that this Act has an impact on all the issues that she's just identified. But my question is more fundamental. My question is more fundamental. I understand that Rachel Hamilton and I might disagree on this issue, but does she at least think that Labour should stand by their words and their commitment to repeal a year ago?
Rachel Hamilton.
Yeah, Labour are in a complete pickle. They don't stand for change and they don't stand for hope. Scotland has one of the most powerful devolved parliaments in the world. The problem isn't the lack of powers, it's this government's failure to use them effectively. The Scottish Government already has control, as I said, of health, of education, of transport, of justice and the economy. Yet in every one of those areas, outcomes are getting worse and worse under their watch. They need to look no further than themselves when it comes to the erosion of Scottish parliamentary powers. Time after time, they have absconded from their duty, refused to allow proper scrutiny in this chamber. In some circumstances, it is policy by press release, without any opportunity for any of us to scrutinise their announcements. They use framework bills increasingly, and they're using Henry VIII powers, which has allowed them to circumvent the robust and proper scrutiny that should be fundamental to this Parliament's role. Instead of presenting developed policies, they pass skeleton framework bills, leaving the crucial detail to be attached later through secondary legislation. That means far less scrutiny and transparency, and this was evident during the passage of the Agricultural Bill, which was passed in June. But farmers are still yet to receive any further detail on the support and the detail within that framework. It's not the behaviour of government that values democracy. Their contempt for parliamentary scrutiny has never been more apparent than yesterday, when they whipped their SNPs to refuse Parliament the opportunity to rightly scrutinise the provision of single-sex spaces. They are not protecting devolution, they are dismantling accountability. One example of where parliamentary scrutiny must be upheld is the Internal Market Act. The legislation, I completely disagree with Kate Forbes, is crucial, protecting Scottish businesses and jobs. She quotes the NFU. They are absolutely 100% behind protecting the integrity of the United Kingdom. Our trade is worth 60% more than that of with Europe, with the rest of the UK. Yes.
Deputy First Minister.
Very, very kind of the member to accept my second intervention. Scottish Crofting Federation say that they fear that the proposed legislation, this is before the IMA was passed, would lead to a race to the bottom, threatening high standards in food, environmental and animal welfare and damage the image of Scottish produce. Their words were proven true, were they not?
Rachel Hamilton.
It is this government that is undermining democracy. It is this government that is trying to put a barrier to trade for the rest of the UK. It is important that farmers and traders and businesses have unfettered access to the rest of the United Kingdom, and they can do that through the principles of market and mutual recognition and non-discrimination. Kate Forbes knows that, absolutely. This legislation is absolutely crucial to protecting Scottish jobs and our economy and that trade that flows freely. Yet, rather than recognising these economic benefits, as we've just heard, the SNP claims this to undermine devolution. The Internal Market Act does not take away powers from the Scottish Parliament. It ensures that we can operate freely without unnecessarily trade barriers. The real threat to Scotland's economy is not the IMA. It's the SNP's relentless pursuit of separation, which would devastate our economy, cut off vital markets and create even more uncertainty for businesses and workers. They claim that the UK's government use of a Section 35 order on the GRR Bill, the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, was an attack on devolution. This is entirely misleading, and Kate Forbes has not answered my colleague Douglas Ross's question as to whether she would have supported the Gender Recognition Reform Act, or indeed the Section 35, which obviously was essential to protect women's spaces and their protections. But this government ignored these concerns, the concerns of women's protections. They rushed the bill through Parliament. They left the UK government with no choice but to act to protect legal consistency across the United Kingdom and to protect the rights and protections of women. This was not about devolution. This was about responsible governance. It was about ensuring that laws passed in Scotland do not have unintended consequences for the rest of the United Kingdom. Even Labour, who voted for the bill, have since admitted that the UK government was right to step in. We know the SNP are obsessed with diversion from the rest of the UK, even when it's not in Scotland's interest. They refuse to embrace gene editing, which could revolutionise Scottish farming and boost our agricultural sector, choosing instead to be different for the sake of it at the expense of Scotland's farmers and food producers. They also chose political posturing when the UK took decisive action to ban XL bullies, simply to be contrarians, only to embarrassingly U-turn later. Miss Robinson.
The members
Their handling
of
this issue perfectly sums up their approach to government. To summarise, Presiding Officer, this Parliament has been given extensive powers, but instead of using them effectively, they have squandered them, opportunity after opportunity. Right now, we see the state of the health service. We see the state of education in Scotland, once world-leading. It has suffered under their governance, and the PISA results showing literacy and numeracy standards tumbling in global rankings. Scotland deserves better than this, Presiding Officer. It's time to move on, to focus on the real priorities and deliver for the people of Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Hamilton. Could you please move your amendment?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Neil Bibby to speak to and to move Amendment 16511.1. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I welcome the opportunity to speak in this debate on protecting the powers of the Scottish Parliament. Of course, given this is the second debate in 2 consecutive days brought forward by the Scottish Government on UK government policy, I would be more grateful to be speaking in a debate on using the Scottish Parliament's powers. Presiding Officer, for far too long, the people of Scotland were badly let down by the previous Tory government, not just with their disrespect for devolution, but by the performative constitutional fights between themselves and the SNP government here. These constitutional fights may have been politically convenient for the parties involved, but they did nothing to improve the lives of the people we represent. The election of a new UK Labour government in July last year that is committed to resetting the relationship between the UK and devolved governments was and is a significant moment that provides us with an important opportunity. An opportunity to end the performative politics and usher in a period of cooperation over conflict between Scotland's governments. I will try today to concentrate on the areas where we can agree, but I do have to say that much of the rhetoric today from the Deputy First Minister does appear to be very performative, particularly when you consider the claims about NHS privatisation and the number of constituents that I have that are having to pay for private treatment on the NHS right now under this SNP government. I'll give way on that point.
Is it Mr Kerr you're giving way to? Stephen Kerr?
Actually, it's an interesting thing that Neil Bibby has taken this line in his speech, because, in fact, to be fair to the Deputy First Minister, she was quoting Neil Bibby himself. I reminded him at the time we last debated UKIMA that the Labour government would not want to repeal it, and that's happened, hasn't it, Neil Bibby? They're not prepared to repeal it because they know it was the right thing for the United Kingdom as a whole and for Scotland in particular.
Mr Bibby.
I'll come on to that point shortly. Because it does, in terms of resetting that relationship, it takes two to tango. And if the Scottish Government is genuinely committed to partnership working and cooperation, then they would be joining with us in focusing and welcoming many of the positive steps being taken forward by the new UK Government. Scottish Labour welcomes... I want to make some progress. Thank you. Scottish Labour welcomes the publication of the UK Government's consultation and review of the United Kingdom Internal Market Act. We also welcome that the review is both broader in scope and being carried out earlier than required by statute. We welcome, too, the UK Labour Government's immediate commitment to finalise the delivery of the Joint Common Frameworks programme ahead of the review which Scottish Labour has called for and called for the last time that we debated this issue. Scottish Labour welcomes the new approach to resetting relations and the UK Labour Government's intentions to rightly uphold its responsibilities in relation to the Windsor Framework as we reset our relationship with the European Union too. All of these points should be welcomed by the Scottish Government and all parties. Indeed, many of these measures have been called for across the Chamber, not just from Scottish Labour. Presiding Officer, the other reason this debate feels performative is that the Scottish Government is prejudging an important review which still has over 6 weeks to go in its consultation. We should all agree... Yeah, I'll take an intervention.
Deputy First Minister.
Yes.
Just on the point of prejudging the outcome, does he not think that explicitly excluding one of the options, the very option that both the Welsh Senate and the Scottish Parliament have supported by a majority, excluding that up front, is prejudging the outcome?
Neil Bibby.
Well, I'll come on to the points about why the Internal Market Act is being reviewed and why it's maintained, but the Cabinet Secretary is prejudging the responses from people in Scotland on the review, because the Deputy First Minister is also the Economic Secretary, and we should all agree that economic growth is of utter importance. And in order to achieve that, it is paramount, and I would agree, and I would hope we would all agree, that the views of Scottish businesses are heard. We know generally that businesses want confidence that they can trade freely across the UK, and that exports to the rest of the UK are worth nearly £50 billion and account for over 60% of all of Scotland's exports. We also know that generally they want regulatory alignment across the UK, and we know from the latest Scottish Business Monitor that 90% of businesses raise political uncertainty as one of their major concerns. The Deputy First Minister may like to think she is the voice of business in the Government. Well, if this debate isn't, again, performative, it does rather beg the question why the Scottish Government is adopting its position before all Scottish businesses have had their say in this review. It is vital that businesses, consumers and other stakeholders here in Scotland, and indeed across the whole of the UK, are listened to. The Government motion... Sorry, I'm going to make some progress. The Government motion today not only prejudges the consultation, it also perhaps ironically prejudges the work and the evidence that the Constitution, Europe, External Affairs and Culture Committee is going to undertake and hear on the review. Again, if this show today from the Scottish Government isn't performative and it really wants to respect the role of the Scottish Parliament, then surely the Deputy First Minister would be awaiting the findings of a Scottish Parliament committee with interest. Presiding Officer, it is regrettable that the Deputy First Minister has criticised the new UK Government's review, and indeed Scottish Labour's position too, and largely ignored the very welcome commitments it has given and the changes of circumstance. Rachel Hamilton said nothing changed after the last debate. In fact, actually a lot has changed since the last debate. The truth, there has been a number of substantial and important steps forward since we last debated this issue in October 2023. Firstly, and most importantly, Mr Kerr, we no longer have a Conservative government, and we have a new UK Labour government that is committed to respecting devolution and resetting the relationship with devolved governments. I remind the Chamber that the motion referred to by the Deputy First Minister earlier called on the UK Government to develop a more consensual means of preserving common standards and safeguards across the UK that does not undermine devolution.
Mr Bibby, I appreciate you were generous with interventions, but you will need to bring your remarks to a close.
That is exactly what the new UK Labour Government is aiming to do, and it is already committed to finalising that framework, the Common Frameworks Programme, and it is also committed to undertaking...
Mr Bibby, you will need to conclude. You're well over your time.
I had a lot more to say, Presiding Officer, but thank you for the opportunity to speak. I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you, Mr Bibby. And I now call on Lorna Slater to open on behalf of the Scottish Greens. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Internal Market Act is a pernicious piece of legislation that not only alters the devolution settlement without the consent of Scotland, but it is limiting in a way that the European Common Market is not. Within the Common Market of the European Union, protections for the environment are viewed as a floor, not a ceiling. Where nations or regions wish to be more ambitious with measures to protect the environment, they may do so. Within the UK single market, the internal market is used to create a ceiling. Anytime Scotland or Wales wish to use their fully devolved powers to move more quickly than England does, say to ban single-use plastics, the UK government gets the final say as to whether they do or don't allow this. The UK government is not required to give any advance notice of what their decision might be, to provide any evidence to support their decision, nor to appear in front of Scottish parliamentary committees to defend or be held accountable for their decision. It is really quite extraordinary that legislation on fully devolved matters, developed over months and years in Scotland, that has been passed by the democratic vote of the Scottish Parliament, can be stopped in this way. And I'll repeat myself because this is a really important point, without providing evidence, justification, or being held democratically accountable for this. We have an egregious example of this in Scotland's deposit return scheme. This example is important because it demonstrates exactly how the Internal Market Act limits wider ambition to protect the environment, how it can be used for political ends to undermine the devolved powers of the Scottish Government and the democratic will of the Scottish Parliament. Back in 2019, all the nations in the UK had the intention to bring in such schemes. Boris Johnson stood for election that year on a manifesto promise to deliver a deposit return scheme that included glass. Scotland went first, with the Scottish Parliament passing the regulations for Scotland's scheme in 2020, before I was elected and before the Internal Market Act was passed. It was recognised that post-Brexit, a mechanism would be needed to figure out how repatriated EU powers would be used by the UK where they clearly infringed on devolved powers. The mechanism developed is called the Common Frameworks. These were agreed by all nations, with the intentions to bring the nations into alignment and to grant exemptions to the IMA where that was not possible. In the case of the deposit return scheme, although the process was followed to the letter, it failed because the Common Frameworks process is not binding on the UK government. Despite saying for years and in published documents as late as January 2023 that Scotland's DRS could contain glass and diverge from England's, the UK government delayed granting the necessary exemption and ultimately refused to grant it at the 11th hour. Now, I know there was significant concern from the members of this chamber at the uncertainty for Scottish businesses that was caused by that delay and devastation. During my closing, I only have 4 minutes.
Ms Leiter indeed only has 4 minutes. Please continue.
And devastation for those people who lost their jobs as a result of this ultimate refusal. There is a slew of correspondence between the convener of Scottish Parliament's NZ Committee and the UK Government, asking them repeatedly to appear before the committee to explain themselves. And the UK Government refused on every occasion. That the Internal Market Act can be used on a whim by the UK Government to harm Scottish businesses, undermine the will of Scottish Parliament and do so without democratic accountability shows that it is a flawed piece of legislation, and any UK Government that respects devolution would immediately repeal it.
Thank you, Ms Leiter. And I now call on Willie Rennie to open on behalf of the Scottish Liberal Democrats. Up to 4 minutes, please.
You've got to commend Lorna Slater for raising the deposit return scheme in the Scottish Parliament and claiming it as an asset. But nevertheless, we are 9 years on from the referendum, and yet we are still debating the consequences of Brexit. And I've hardly seen any great benefits from Brexit so far. I've not really seen great trade agreements with other nations of the world that are bringing huge volumes of trade into the United Kingdom. But still, we're dealing with the consequences of that. There is no doubt that following Brexit, we needed to have a new market arrangement. Replacing the single market with the Internal Market Act probably was required. It's not whether we had something, it's how we had it. And there is also no doubt that the last Conservative government were far too heavy-handed in its use of the Internal Market Act. There's no doubt about that. But the real deep flaws within the Internal Market Act, and there are deep flaws within the Internal Market Act, is the mutual, the mutual recognition arrangements, where it is a requirement that businesses can sell goods in any part of the United Kingdom and not have to comply with the laws of any particular part of the United Kingdom if the requirements are different. Now, that isn't an approach that I would encourage, because it dismisses local requirements and local standards. It dismisses innovation within different parts of the United Kingdom, which is something that I would want to encourage. But neither would I want to get a situation where companies were choosing not to trade with certain parts of the United Kingdom because the standards were so different. So there is a balance to strike with all of this. And I have to say, I'm sceptical about some of the arguments that the Deputy First Minister is using, particularly around about the privatisation of the NHS, because I think it undermines the actual argument I think that probably many of us would agree with, which is about making sure we get a right balance between local innovation, local difference, local regulation, but also the need to have the ability to trade across the United Kingdom in a way that doesn't hinder business in an unnecessary way. Now, I think the UK Government's consultation is an opportunity. I would prefer to repeal the Internal Market Act, but whether we repeal or change substantially, I don't really mind about the process. But what must change is the way that it works, in particular the kind of crude application of mutual recognition. Now, I think UK and a changing Europe have been quite sensible at coming forward with quite some pragmatic solutions to this, particularly around about the two important principles that they set out. One is subsidiarity, and the second is proportionality. And the subsidiarity and proportionality elements allow for a degree of common decision-making across the United Kingdom, which is what the frameworks are supposed to be about. But we should make sure that is enshrined in the law to make sure there is a requirement for different parts of the United Kingdom to agree with each other. In other words, it shouldn't just be the Westminster Government that has the final say in all occasions. There needs to be a way of reaching decisions between the different parliaments and assemblies of the United Kingdom, together with the Westminster Parliament as well. And the current arrangement, therefore, is not acceptable. And proportionality, of course, you want difference, without that difference being too great that it deters trade across the United Kingdom. In other words, and I've been banging on about this for a long time, is federalism. Federalism is the answer to this problem, and I think if we adopted that more pragmatic, sensible solution, we might be able to get through this particular problem.
Thank you, Mr Rennie. We will now move to the open debate. I call George Adam to be followed by Jackson Carlo. Up to 4 minutes, please, Mr Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As you're aware, Presiding Officer, I've been a member of this Parliament for a wee while. Things have changed. I've changed a bit. My hair's a wee bit lighter than what it was when I first came in here. And yes, Christine Graham has just said at least I've still got a full head of hair. But also, my suits may be a wee bit larger than what they were when I first walked in here. But one thing that never changes is the Unionist Party's attitude to this Scottish Parliament. That's never changed in all these years. Whether it be Labour or whether it be Tory, they make promises during an election, and the minute the election happens, it's revert back to just protect the British state at all case and not look at any other ideas whatsoever. But during that time I've been here, I've seen debate in this Parliament, in Scotland and the rest of the world change. There are those who want to disrupt the whole political system, and there are those that run in fear of those that want to disrupt. And that concerns me and worries me. And much of the debate we're having today are some of those that are running in fear of those that want to disrupt the political system. Brexit itself is an example of those that want to disrupt the political system. But one thing will remain, and remain the same, Presiding Officer. I will represent the people of Paisley, as I always have, and will speak up for them. And they want to hear how this Parliament can help be a part of the solutions of all the life problems that they face and issues that they face. As always, it will always be an honour for me to stand in this chamber and speak up for the people of Paisley and Scotland. But today it's with a deep concern, because the very powers of this Parliament, as the Deputy First Minister said, the powers that the people of Scotland voted for in 1997, is under attack. The UK Internal Market Act is the biggest threat to devolution we've had since this Parliament was reconvened. It's nothing short of a Westminster power grab, an attempt to roll back the hard gains of devolution. And there's many of us here remember what that fight was like to get this Parliament and these kind of hard gains. But it's undemocratic, it's undermining the democracy of the Scottish people. Let's be absolutely clear, this Act was imposed in Scotland against our will. Both the Scottish Parliament and the Senate in Wales refused consent for it, yet Westminster forced it through anyway. This is not cooperation. This is not respect. This is Westminster deciding that Scotland's voice doesn't matter. Presiding Officer, the Tories told us during Brexit that they wanted to take back control. Well, now we see exactly what they meant. It wasn't about giving power to people, it was about taking power away from the people of Scotland. The Internal Market Act allows UK ministers to override decisions made by this Parliament in devolved areas without our consent. That means they can force policies upon us whether we want them or not. They could undermine our food standards, our environmental protections, even the way we support our businesses. And in areas like public health, where Scotland has led the way with minimum price alcohol unit and free prescriptions, this Act creates uncertainty as to whether we can continue to make these progressive choices. Presiding Officer, it's not just the Tories to blame here, it's Labour when in opposition they said they would scrap the Act, but once again they refused to do that. Presiding Officer, we in the SNP have fought tooth and nail against this Act from day one. We warned it was a power grab, we warned it would damage devolution, and we were right. This Parliament is here because the people of Scotland demanded it, but if Westminster can simply override their decisions whether they like that, what kind of devolution is that? Let me be absolutely clear. The only way to fully protect the Parliament, the only way to ensure Scotland's future is Scotland's hands is for independence. Because, Presiding Officer, if Westminster will not respect our Parliament, then the people of Scotland deserve the chance to choose a different future. And a future where decisions about Scotland are made in Scotland by the people of Scotland.
Thank you, Mr Adam. I now call Jackson Carnott to be followed by Kenneth Gibson. Up to 6 minutes, Mr Carnott, as agreed.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I suppose it's always a pleasure to follow George Adam. I might observe when he said that the UK Government seeks to protect the British state, that that's in fact what the people of Scotland voted for in 2014. This is something of a pretty kettle of fish in this afternoon's debate. I was reflecting earlier when Kate Forbes stood to speak that when I first came into this Parliament, Miss Forbes was 17, just having left school and was off to Cambridge University. And of course, there's been the repository of a great deal of hope, I think, among many, of bringing a more enlightened view to the Parliament. Angus Roberts and I were both more fiery redheads in those days. He's gone into a sort of slightly depressing-looking grey look. I maintained a slightly strawberry blonde colour. But But notwithstanding, he was at Westminster at that point, aggressively campaigning for a referendum on Europe, as I understand and recall at the time. But neither of them were here in what I think was the SNP's best parliament, 2007 to 11. And I'll characterise why and why things went wrong after that, and why I think the focus of this debate is so wrong. In those days, the business manager, Bruce Crawford, and the late Brian Adam, for whom I think many of us had a great deal of affection and respect, worked the corridors of this Parliament, engaging with all the other parties, because the government was a minority government. It recognised this as a horseshoe, not a divide like Westminster, and it understood that in order to deliver policy, it required to achieve agreement across parties. And I think that 2007-11 Parliament was all the more effective for it. The First Minister, Alex Salmond, Jim Mather, who was the Business Secretary, John Swinney, who was the Finance Secretary, all of them engaged with other parties to achieve policy, some of which is still the longest-lasting and best remembered policy achievements. Even when the SNP list their achievements, very often they are the achievements of that first administration. And I will give way to Shona Robertson.
Cabinet Secretary for Finance.
Jackson Carlaw makes some important points. Does he agree, though, that it's not just about the actions of the government that's important in these circumstances? And does he recognise how different the opposition is in this place compared to the period of time that he cites?
Jackson Carlaw.
It's a fair point, and let me come to it, because what has changed, I think effectively what changed is the electoral system, which is what sends us all here, has elected since not the same proportionality within the Parliament that encouraged that sort of engagement and agreement between parties to achieve policy, but a Parliament which has allowed one party to be much more dogmatic and definitive in the way it has progressed legislation, but not with a record of achievement. Because we now have across all our public services, unarguably, a position of which none of us can be proud, and which is less effective or successful than it was back at that time. You know, when my colleague Margaret Mitchell passed the No-Fault Public Apologies Bill, I don't think we thought it would be the Scottish Government that took the greatest advantage of it. How many times do ministers stand up and apologise, but then say it's not my fault? Next, we have the let's thank our public services, but actually do nothing to improve them bill. Our public services are fed up with being thanked without actually policy changes which effectively improve our public services. And that is where our central failure is. Look at waiting times this week. I will in a second. Was I alone in 2011, when we now had a majority government? A total of 784 people waited more than 12 hours in emergency departments. By last year, the number had risen to 76,346. Who in this Parliament can be proud of our collective achievement if that is the end result? And what is the Deputy First Minister's response? And I will give way to her, to fall into the habit of every one of our predecessors to say that the real threat is that the Tories or Westminster are set to privatise the NHS in Scotland. For goodness sake, really, is that the level of our debate? How much more effective would it be if the parties in this Parliament operated more effectively as we did in the first SNP-led administration and sought to find a workable collective solution to the problems of Scotland's NHS rather than childish and simplistic slogans? I give way to
Deputy First Minister.
If it's any consolation, I was quoting Nigel Farage rather than the Conservatives, just to make that point crystal clear. But the member talks quite rightly about the importance of accountability. In other words, all of us being accountable to the electorate on the basis of the decisions that we take. And the point I was making, it's a principled point in my comments, was that if those decisions are then unilaterally overruled, there isn't that accountability. So does he not think that the UK IMA undermines the very accountability he proclaims?
Jackson Carlaw.
From the Deputy First Minister might be more effective if the government itself paid attention to divisions in this Parliament where they have lost a vote, but then carried on regardless and completely ignored the fact that they have not had the support of Parliament for the actions I'm coming to the end, and I want to be constructive in as much as I can. I did think, looking at Kate Forbes' question to the Labour Party, Neil Bibby replied it takes two to tango. Well, I think Labour are well and truly tangoed, frankly, in respect of the position they took. And I would say, why did they make the commitment they did? Because fools rush in where angels fear to tread. But how do we hope to proceed in the next Parliament? Given that this Parliament has had the Calman Commission, the Smith Commission, as far as I'm concerned, an extension of powers that it simply didn't have in 2007, well, I think the next Parliament, presiding officer and party leaders, need to think very carefully. The more we have become mature in age, the less mature we have become in performance of this Parliament. It's a watershed. The galleries are empty at First Minister's questions. The ratings for SP television have absolutely collapsed. The public are falling out of love with this institution because it is not delivering. We have to work in the next Parliament collectively, I think, to try and pull together in a way which actually delivers for Scotland and not just rhetorical, empty debate.
Thank you, Mr Carlow. I now call Kenneth Gibson to be followed by Alec Riley. Mr Gibson, up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And following that, I would say that the Tories oppose the very existence of this Parliament and have sought to undermine it at every possible opportunity over the last decade and more. And the assertion that Scotland is the most powerful devolved nation in the world is the epitome of unionist rhetoric, often peddled by Tory MSPs, a claim wheeled out when legitimate concerns are raised regarding the erosion of Scotland's devolved powers. It's ludicrous in a Parliament with no authority over broadcasting, currency, defence, energy, foreign policy, telecommunications, postal services, currency, immigration, income tax thresholds, VAT, national insurance corporation tax, inheritance tax, fuel, pensions, tobacco and alcohol duties, etc., and which cannot borrow prudentially as local authorities can. We can't even ban the sale of fireworks in this Parliament. While successive UK governments deny greater self-governance for Scotland, refusing even to say what constitutes, in their eyes, a mandate for an independence referendum, the UK Internal Market Act, UKIMA, undermines the existing devolution settlement. The excuse establishing a smooth internal UK market seems odd given the willingness of Brexiteers to leave the much bigger European single market. UKIMA delivered an unprecedented and audacious overreach, affording UK ministers control over devolved spending in culture, sport, education, economic development and infrastructure. The Northern Ireland Quarterly called the Act a red flag symptom of constitutional ill health and the most contentious and glaring manifestation of Westminster's growing propensity to impose its will upon the devolved nations without democratic consent. An overwhelming majority of MSPs and their Welsh counterparts decisively rejected granting legislative consent. Nevertheless, the Sewell Convention was disregarded and the Act unilaterally imposed. Westminster Tories wasted no time in steamrolling Scottish ministers and flexing their self-appointed new powers, introducing the Shared Prosperity Fund to bypass Holyrood with meagre resources intended to limit this Parliament's influence over economic development and infrastructure. Efforts to curb single-use plastics met repeated obstacles, the Act allowing Westminster to override devolved policies under the pretense of market consistency. Previously, Scotland could maintain higher standards on pesticide use, agricultural practices and public health, but can now be forced to accept inferior goods and services. Glasgow University Centre for Public Policy said, UKIMA-driven coordination risks stifling policy innovation at the devolved level, may slow the pace of policy development and could generate pressure to conform to the standards that the UK Government deems appropriate for England. Even the ban on glue traps was stonewalled, the UK Government refusing Scotland an exemption. All of this in the most devolved nation in the world, a preposterous claim. For many UK politicians, the Union is mistakenly conceived as a unitary state, rather than a voluntary political union of nations, with devolution long perceived as requiring neutering. Despite supposed nation status compared to provinces, autonomous communities or constituent territories, our devolved powers are weak. The Basque Country controls all tax revenues, with only 6.29% sent to Madrid for shared responsibilities like defence and foreign affairs. Quebec's immigration powers shape its demographic and economic trajectory according to its priorities. A Scottish equivalent could target labour shortages, attract skilled professionals into vital sectors such as healthcare, aerospace and renewables. And as Crown dependencies, the Channel Islands set their own tax rates, including corporation tax and VAT. They set import duties with responsibility for customs and immigration, deciding, unlike Scotland, who can live and work in their communities, and they negotiate international agreements with other countries. And Isle of Man and Jersey also have similar powers. Meanwhile, we face the capricious indifference of London post-Brexit. Presiding Officer, devolution has led market interventions in health, environment and welfare, yet our powers are simply not robust enough to defend policies against legal challenges or UK pressures undermining their effectiveness. UKEMA strikes at the heart of devolution, as it's designed to do. UK authority of decisions that should be made here diminishes this Parliament. This deliberate erosion of devolved powers is one Labour's branch office, as always awaiting their orders from London, now seems in no hurry to reverse. Sadly for those backing devolution, but not independence, their pitiful lack of ambition doesn't even extend to Scotland having the same powers as Guernsey. It's time they raised their game.
Thank you, Mr Gibson. I now call Alec Rowley to be followed by Emma Roddick. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I have always believed that the best way to protect devolution in Scotland is to demonstrate what devolution can deliver for the people of Scotland. And by doing so, then no one would dare threaten devolution. But today I find it quite depressing in terms of some of the level of debate that we've actually had in here. Kenneth Gibson talks about the cannot do approach. We've not got powers, we cannot do. Well, what about what we can do? I actually agreed with the points that Rachel Hamilton was making. When you look at housing, today, as almost every day, I'm dealing with issues of housing, and yet this Parliament, celebrating 25 years, has not only failed to tackle some of the big housing issues, it now has declared a housing crisis. What about education, where we can do? We can do so much more. We have crisis in the classroom, in our NHS, in health and social care, all areas where people looking on would have expected this Scottish Parliament, certainly when I campaigned for this Scottish Parliament all those years ago, I believed that it would be best at a Scottish level to tackle the housing issues, to tackle education, to tackle health. So we don't seem to want to use the powers that we got. We don't seem to want to take responsibility for the powers that we got. We just come here year after year after year bemoaning. I was thinking to myself the other day, 11 years I've been in this Parliament, 11 years I've been in this Parliament, and I have not seen progress on all these big issues that are the day-to-day bread and butter issues that the people of Scotland expected this Parliament to take. Briefly,
Minister Jamie Hepburn.
He seems to be complaining about the terms of today's debate, but of course the terms of today's debate are calling for the repeal of the Internal Market Act. I spoke in the same debate as Mr Rowley did on the 3rd of October 2023, where he and I voted for the repeal of the Internal Market Act. Does Alec Rowley agree with himself on that time when he voted for the repeal of that? Will he be doing so today?
Presiding Officer, I very much welcome the fact that the UK Government have brought forward this consultation and discussion. I equally very much welcome the fact, and the difference between the Conservatives in power and Labour in power is that we have a government which is saying that it wants to work with the devolved administrations, not to simply come up with grudge and bemoan the UK Government, but to work together. That's the big massive difference, and that's what we were asking for. We were asking for common frameworks previously. We were asking for governments to work together. But let me get back to the point, because this is about this Scottish Parliament continually failing to deliver on the areas that it has responsibility for, whilst coming up with excuse after excuse. No wonder you don't want to come here today and talk about the National Health Service, or talk about education, or talk about the crisis in housing that, if you're dealing with every day, it is absolutely heartbreaking. Those are the issues that the people of Scotland vote for this Parliament to act on, to deliver on. But this government, this SNP government, knows if those were the issues we were discussing today, then it would be shown just the amount of failure that we have coming from this Scottish Government. Hence, you'll come along here and talk about the powers you do not have. What I believe is that the Scottish people are very clear. They want every MSP in here to earn their crust, to start working and using the powers that we do have to improve people in Scotland's lives. That's their challenge.
Thank you, Mr Riley. I now call Emma Roddick to be followed by Faisal Chowdhury. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I just want to start by saying that recycling schemes and dog breeding and restrictions on products high in sugar, the Internal Market Act is acting as a sword of Damocles hanging over anybody trying to govern Scotland or any of the other devolved nations within the UK. Now, these issues and the other ones that have been raised in the debate so far are issues that this Parliament can do. These are devolved issues, so it's all very well to shout about we should use the powers that we've got. But that's what this whole debate is about. Let us use the powers that we've got. Yeah. The Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Senedd refusing consent to this legislation should have been the end of it, and in any normal democratic setup it would have been. I campaigned for independence in 2014, and I know full well that back then, if I had said, not only will the Tories undo devolution, but when Labour gets in after them, they're going to keep it that way, folk would have said that I was scaremongering. They would have said that this was our Project Fear. They said, lead, don't leave. They didn't say, if you try and lead the way, we're going to stop you. They promised us more powers, not a complete flip of what devolution means. So the reality that we are all living only a decade later is that the Sewell Convention is meaningless, and there's not only a hostile UK government in place, but no prospect of any party taking control in London which will respect the decisions that are made in this chamber. The democratically elected representatives of Scotland should be the people who make decisions about Scotland and for Scotland. That is an incredibly simple premise, but it is not being upheld. This Act allows UK ministers to override decisions that we make here using the powers that everybody agrees we do have. That is blatantly wrong. It was atrocious that the Conservatives brought this attack on devolution in, but it is unforgivable that Labour is keeping it in place despite the party's own opposition to it not too long ago. The Internal Market Act is pretending to be something it's not. It's disguised as teamwork, looking at shared goals and trade, but it is only about taking control. And Scotland is not for sale. If the Internal Market Act is the answer, Scotland wasn't asking the question. And I want to be clear that I don't think there's any excuse for Labour keeping this legislation now. But I do still want to warn its ministers and members alike that they cannot solely legislate on the basis that they're going to be in power forever. Because imagine a Labour Scottish Government. It's unlikely, but imagine it. And imagine what that would look like alongside a far more likely reform Westminster. Should the government that Scotland elects, regardless of what party or parties make it up, govern in constant fear of being undermined and overruled by whoever's in Westminster? If that is really the position of Labour or anyone else, I have no idea what they are doing sitting in this place. Now, what I wanted to ask Rachel Hamilton earlier when she talked down the Scottish Government wanting to take a different approach to the UK on things like what nobody thinks is a long-term, sustainable, sensible position on controlling XL bullies, what on earth is it okay for us to do differently? Because we should do things differently here. We are a different country. We can take decisions to work with our closest neighbours or nations across the world where we agree on shared goals on tackling climate change and furthering human rights, but those agreements or treaties or unions should be voluntary. The use of the Internal Market Act powers by Whitehall to us is not voluntary. The Act itself was not brought in voluntarily, and this union is no longer voluntary. It is unacceptable that the UK Government, any UK Government, would override the wishes of this democratically elected Scottish Parliament. And I hope that people stop accepting it, because there is an alternative, and you know where I'm going with this, Presiding Officer. The very clear alternative is independence.
Thank you, Ms Roddick. I call Faisal Chowdhury to be followed by Christine Graham. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The UK Government was elected on a manifesto to reset the relationship with devolved administration. After years of antagonism under the Conservative, we need to move on to relationship based on collaboration and respect, to deliver for the public and business. The announcement of the consultation and early review into the internal market is evidence the Labour government is proactively rebuilding this relationship and working with rather than against devolved government. The ministerial forward to the review from Douglas Alexander, MP for East Lothian, states the UK government wants to work in a collaborative and transparent way. Equally, Labour reversed a decision from the old Tory government to block the banning of glue traps by the Scottish government. Members should be welcoming the change from the Conservative government, which frequently run over devolution, includes reckless passages of the Internet Market Bill in 2020. I have a lot to go through, and I don't want to go on argument what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing. Let me put some words what I want to say to a Labour government which to a Labour government which views devolved governments as partners, not rivals. The review of the Internal Market Act must achieve a reformed agreement that works for Scotland and gives businesses barrier-free trade. Scotland exports to the rest of the UK are valued at over 45 billion. It is, I'm sorry, I did say that I don't want to go on any arguments. I have points to put here. It is key for economic growth that businesses face no obstacles to trade with Wales and England, particularly small businesses who may not have the resources to deal with differing regulations between nations. While there has previously been exclusion in the internal market with single-use plastics, the most recent annual report from the Office of the Internal Market named other products which may be regulated in the future, like cosmetic and fireworks. Therefore, I welcome the expansion of the review to include the exclusion process, especially on the transparency where there is no process for informing Parliament or consulting with businesses when seeking an exclusion. As noted by the Constitution, Europe and External Affairs Committee in their report on the Internal Market Bill. Above all, business should have certainly in the rules they will be following, and transparent process is key to that. To conclude, Presiding Officer, I would have hoped to hear today how the Scottish Government plans to respond to the consultation, to deliver for businesses and drive economic growth, rather than more constitutional roles. But I do hope that Scottish Government engages fully with the review and consultation, and look forward to hearing the finding of the Constitution, Europe and External Affairs Committee after they take evidence in March. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Chowdhury. And I call the last speaker in the open debate, Christine Graham. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I shall quote from the debate of 7th October 2020 on legislative consent to the UK Internal Market Bill. Mike Russell, opening for the Scottish Government, I quote, "In parts 1 and 2, the bill contains sweeping new blanket mutual recognition and non-discrimination provisions. Regardless of the views of the Parliament or the wishes of the people of Scotland, they would require Scotland to accept lower standards relating to food, as pointed out by Food Standards Scotland, the environment, as pointed out by Scottish Environment Link. The scope of those powers can unilaterally be changed by UK ministers and only by them." Quotes, "There are sweeping new spending powers in Part 6 that threaten the devolved Scottish budget and transfer decision-making over areas of devolved spending from the Scottish Government to the UK Government. Examples: thank goodness minimum unit pricing predated the Act. We could not do that now without UK say-so. We can't ban the sale of electronic shock colours without UK permission. And we know that funding for devolved projects formerly awarded by the EU is now dished out by the UK, taking a detour round devolution. Now to Alec Rowley, dancing on the head of a pin, and no wonder, opening for Labour in the same 2020 debate. I quote, and it makes me feel almost sorry for him, almost. Quote, "I want to make it clear that we will not give consent to the United Kingdom Internal Market Bill. Let me be clear. We will not give support to any measures that will reduce and constrain the competence of the Scottish Parliament. As a political party, Labour is committed to devolution. For the avoidance of doubt, and I'll emphasise this, the bill is a full-on attack on the existing devolution settlement. And quote, however, it's not just the United Kingdom internal market drives a coach and horses through devolution, but that it paves the way, in my view, for private and multinational companies to force their way into key public services in Scotland. Close quotes. And Claudia Beamish, in closing for Labour, quote, we will not support legislative consent for such a disrespectful and dangerous bill. Close quotes. So my question to Labour is this. If it was disrespectful and dangerous, it should not be reviewed, but repealed. After all, that was your position less than 5 years ago. But then, betraying the WASPy women, betraying the pensioners over their universal fuel allowance, betraying employers through increased national insurance contributions, that job tax, not repealing internal market legislation is a further betrayal, this time of devolution. Surely that's a CV fit for the programme, The Traitors.
Thank you, Ms Graham. We now move to closing speeches. I call on Lorna Slater to close on behalf of the Scottish Greens. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I want to reassure Willie Rennie that I am happy to talk about deposit return scheme any time and to discuss it and debate it in this chamber. And of course, if any members wish to make interventions during my closing remarks, I'd be happy to accept them. I think it was Emma Roddick who actually summed up this debate. Mr Ewing, go ahead.
Fergus.
I'm grateful to Ms Slater for giving way. Does she recall that in an unprecedented expression of condemnation of this legislation, which Ms Slater was then in charge of as a minister, around 600 businesses across every single range that would have been affected by the deposit return scheme said it was unworkable, unachievable, and quite frankly should have been scrapped? And does she believe that she still thinks that this scheme should have gone ahead as planned? Were all these businesses throughout the whole of Scotland
Thank you,
wrong?
Mr Ewing. I think we've got the gist. Ms Slater.
I recall that the regulations covering that scheme were passed by this Parliament in 2020. It was the will of Parliament that that scheme be put into place. And I note that the UK Government in the last few weeks has passed similar regulations based on the ones in Scotland, because the UK Government officials worked closely with our officials here to develop those. So that will now be coming to the entire UK, whether the member supports it or not. Emma Roddick, I think, put it best in this debate, where she outlined, as I did, that what we've been talking about here are attempts by this Scottish Parliament to use the powers that they have or should have under devolution, and demonstrating where they have been and could be blocked. Even the most basic and simple things, like starting a recycling scheme for bottles and cans, a few months ahead of the rest of the UK, blocked. Labour are indeed approaching this like they can never imagine being in government in Scotland themselves, or that if they were in government in Scotland themselves, they just see themselves being yes men and women to Westminster, never ever using the powers of the Scottish Parliament to lead, to make a difference, to diverge in any way at all. Scottish Labour were desperately hoping that a Labour government in Westminster would undermine the case for Scottish independence. But it has done the opposite by demonstrating that it doesn't matter who's in power in Westminster. The UK Government will retain the power to veto legislation made by the Scottish Parliament in fully devolved areas. Scotland and Wales will continue to have their ambition to protect the environment curtailed, forcing us to move forward at the rate of the slowest nation, or rather, at the rate of England, which is contrary to the whole principle of devolution. No more innovation for Scotland. No more moving first for Scotland. No more trying out policy ideas in Scotland and seeing if they work well before the rest of the UK can take them on. Certainly.
Briefly, Jackson Carlo.
It was a Conservative government that transferred taxation powers to this Parliament, and it is this Parliament that is able to diverge from the rest of the United Kingdom in the tax policies it implements. Is the member completely oblivious to that?
Lawrence Slater.
I am, of course, grateful for those taxpayers and having used them to put in place progressive taxation. But we're talking about the Internal Market Act today, which is a mechanism for taking powers away from the Scottish Parliament. And I remember protesting this state of affairs at an intergovernmental meeting when I was a Minister for the Circular Economy and being thundered at by a UK Secretary of State that a devolved system is not a federal system, meaning our powers are not protected by the Constitution. Well, quite. The Scottish Greens maintain that Scotland should cease being part of this union and single market and instead be an independent nation inside the European Union and their common market. And everything that the Labour government is doing reinforces this position.
Thank you, Ms Slater. I now call on Martin Whitfield to close on behalf of Scottish Labour. Up to 6 minutes, please. I'm very grateful, Deputy Presiding Officer. This has been almost 3 debates in one, 2 of which were interesting. I have to say in the outset that, Scottish Labour welcomes the new UK Labour government, which no one would be surprised at, but also its commitment to resetting the relationship with the devolved governments, and actually has wasted no time in demonstrating that. It is fascinating when we have statements and questions and the Scottish Government talk about and talk up the close working relationship that exists between the new UK Government and the Scottish Government. And then we have a debate like this, following a debate yesterday. Yesterday's debate chosen, and could not possibly criticise the Scottish Government for wanting to level criticism at other governments. And then we have today's debate, which possibly, rather than being heralded as protecting the powers of the Scottish Parliament, might have been an invite back to talk about independence, although I know the Scottish Government's front bench was silent on that point. I'm more than happy to take a short intervention from the...
There's really one central point in the debate today, which is that Labour did vote to repeal the IMA in October 2023, and now Labour in government has explicitly ruled that out. Is that a U-turn or is it not?
Martin Whitfield.
Much in the same way as the Scottish Government decided to bring this debate before the committee report that the inquiry is ongoing onto, before, well, we made an indication of another debate. A debate that, other than with one reference, has not discussed the importance of the Windsor Framework and the requirement to act in good faith in protecting the UK internal market. Was there a change? Yes. And to Christine Graham's assertions of quoting from reference, absolutely, this is an act that needs to be fixed. The vehicle for that fixing of the act is underway. It's been brought forward. I'm more than happy to give way to the Parliamentary Minister.
Minister Jamie Hepburn.
Mr Whitfield says this is an act that needs to be fixed. On the 3rd of October 2023, Mr Whitfield voted for the repeal of this act. Does he still believe that the act should be repealed?
Martin Whitfield.
I believe the act should be fixed. Absolutely, the act needs to be. And there we have the lap of derision from those that are paying attention. It would be right to say, of course, that in the UK Labour manifesto, we spoke about Labour's strengthening the Sewell Convention, which has been raised today, setting out a new memorandum of understanding, because the governments need to work together. And I will again quote a Scottish MP sitting at the heart of the UK government, Douglas Alexander MP. The government are committed to working closely with the devolved governments to deliver effective outcomes for people across the UK, and that we recognise that the operation of the UK Internal Market Act can be improved, including more certainty and clarity. And in that sits the entrance to the other part of this debate, which is talked, with apologies to Christine Graham, I didn't need to make progress, and I want to deal with the other element of today's debate, which is the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament. And the fact that it's interesting when you listen to contributions, the word Scottish Government and the use of the will of the Scottish Parliament is interchanged so frequently when an assurance is needed that it is
with an allegation that the whole of this Parliament has agreed something, rather than it being the will of the Scottish Government. And it is interesting to revisit the contribution of Jackson Carlow, who has the privilege of being able to look back at the 2008 to 11 government. And I do hope in no way his speech was heralding any intention of departure on his own terms from this place. Because the Scottish Government is now in the position of a minority government. It has tried, and on some occasions has achieved, to reach out, but not with the certainty, not with the strength, not with the clarity of previous governments in this place. And indeed, we need to remember that under the Scotland Act, this chamber was set up, in essence, to be a government of minorities, to take the strength of the wisdom of those across the whole of Scotland to work together. And it is a skill. It's a skill that needs to be practised. It's a skill that needs to be attuned. It is a skill that constantly needs to be revisited. And I felt that Jackson Carlow's discussion about the ability to walk the corridors, to talk to people, is something that is duly lacking in this Parliament for whatever reason. And it would be an interesting invite, having taken an intervention from the Minister for Parliamentary Affairs, Parliamentary Business, indeed to consider that, to see where actually across this Parliament we can find agreement for the really important things that Alec Rowley raised about the NHS, about housing, about education. I will take
Cabinet Secretary Shirley-Ann Somerville.
Thank the member for taking an intervention. Can I point him to the progress that's been made on the budget and the fact that the Liberal Democrats and the Scottish Greens took up the advantage of the types of meetings that he is exactly suggesting? They can happen. It takes two sides to actually have those, and if only Scottish Labour had been part of that, they might not be sitting on their hands at stage 3.
I'll give you a bit of time back, Mr.
I'm grateful for the intervention, and in conclusion on that point, and I mean this with the greatest of respect, perhaps there lies the challenge in reaching out across this chamber from those that sit in government. The challenge of actually working harder to do it, the challenge of actually working in a way to seek that consensus, and perhaps then Scotland will have a Parliament that it can remember and respect. I'm grateful, Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Whitfield. I now call on Stephen Kerr to close on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Well, where to begin, Presiding Officer? To sum up this debate, let's all agree on one thing, that our Scottish Parliament was created to serve the people of Scotland. It was meant to be a place of progress, of pragmatism, of partnership within a strong and united Kingdom. But under the SNP, it has been reduced to a platform, as we have heard today, even from the Deputy First Minister, for grievance, fantasy division, failure. And that, Presiding Officer, is the real threat to this Parliament. Now, very short intervention.
Deputy First Minister.
Does the member accept that it's the electorate that sent each of us here, and a platform or otherwise, whatever he uses to describe it, is a Parliament that's accountable to the people?
Stephen Kerr.
The Parliament is accountable to the people, but the people expect parliamentarians to behave in a certain way, and that is not well, you can all laugh. I think, was there a great mirror dropped in front of you all that you had such a laugh? Now let's talk about power, because since 1999, and particularly after the 2014 referendum and Brexit, this Parliament has been entrusted with many new powers, significant powers, powers that should be used to change lives for the better. And what have the SNP done? They've squandered them. That was Alex Rowley's point. Either they have let them gather dust, or worse, they've wielded them with such incompetence. The most expensive minister in the history of devolution gave us a regale or a reminiscence on the deposit return scheme. They've caused more harm than good. Presiding Officer, let's deal in facts. Scottish trade, the rest of the UK, worth over £52 billion annually, 60% of our total exports. That's not a made-up statistic for debate. That's economic reality, and the internal UK market is the foundation of Scotland's prosperity. But the SNP, no, they attack it, they undermine it, and they do so knowing full well that it is to Scotland's detriment. And yet, Presiding Officer, they have no problem whatsoever with the European Union's internal market. Not a peep, not a murmur, not a protest. When we were in the EU, we were on the receiving end of 12,000 new regulations a year. I will hear from the most expensive minister in the history of devolution. Yes.
Lawrence Slater.
Recognise that the conditions of membership for the European Union are substantially different, and things like environmental regulation are a floor, not a ceiling. We would have more freedom within that union.
Stephen Kerr.
There were 12,000 new regulations arrived in this country every year we were members of the European Union. Where was the outrage from the SNP then about our lack of ability to change them or alter them? We just had to accept them. Where were their demands for the scrutiny of our legislative consent or sovereignty? Nowhere, presiding officer. But when the UK government brings in sensible, necessary legislation to protect seamless trade within our country, they wail, they whinge, they throw their hands up in horror. It's nothing short of nonsense. It's incoherence of the highest order. And, presiding officer, this is not about principle. It's not about principle, this debate. It's about point scoring. It's about the SNP's relentless, tiresome, never-ending campaign of grievance against Westminster. They don't oppose regulatory frameworks. They just oppose anything with UK in the title. And let's not forget their ultimate ambition, dragging Scotland back into the European Union. They'd swap our seat at the table in the United Kingdom for the status of a voiceless, insignificant region in the EU. That is their plan, presiding officer. That is their vision for Scotland. And speaking of hypocrisy, let's talk about Labour. Labour mumped and moaned about the UK Internal Market Act. Oh, how they protested, oh, how they blustered, all for the sake of political point scoring. But, presiding officer, let's get to the truth. I told this Parliament before, in the debates that have been referenced in the course of this debate, Labour would never repeal the Act if they ever got into power. They would never. And guess what? They won't. Repealing the Act is off the agenda. They won't do it. They never intended to. Never has an incoming government shown such a blatant lack of integrity as this Labour government and the people have seen through them. They break every promise they make. They haven't a plan. They haven't a clue. This is the reality we face. This is the reality we face. Audit Scotland has ripped apart the SNP's record in government. Reports lay bare their incompetence. The NHS in crisis. Infrastructure delayed and deteriorating. Education slipping backwards. And let's be clear, the SNP's failures are not accidental. They are not one-offs. They're a pattern of mismanagement, a pattern of poor governance, a pattern of deflection, a pattern of denial. Presiding officer, let's remind ourselves what this Parliament was meant to be. A place of robust debate. A place of scrutiny, a place of solutions. But under the SNP, this Parliament has been reduced as a mouthpiece for nationalism. Debate, as we have seen this week, is stifled. Committees are stuffed with party loyalists. Laws are rushed through with minimal oversight or scrutiny. Framework bills hand on check power to ministers. This is not democracy, presiding officer. This is a press release democracy. This is an insult to democracy. The real threat to this Parliament is not Westminster. It is the SNP. It is the SNP's misuse of its powers. It is their obsession, as we've heard again today, with grievance politics. I wish the people of Scotland did watch Scottish Parliament TV, Jackson Carlow. No one's watching. And you know why? Because it's so predictable and boring. The people of Scotland are sick to the back teeth of the SNP's rhetoric of division and grievance. They are the threat to devolution. So let me be quite clear about this. The United Kingdom Internal Market Act 2020 is not a threat. It's a guarantee of economic stability, a guarantee of seamless trade, an underpinning of our prosperity, and it must be protected. The Scottish Conservatives would restore this Parliament to what it's meant to be, a Parliament that serves the people, a Parliament that delivers results. The SNP have failed, Labour are failing, Scotland demands better, and, presiding officer, the Scottish Conservatives can deliver that common sense that the people of Scotland now want to see.
Thank you, Mr Kerr. I now call on Cabinet Secretary Angus Robertson to close on behalf of the Scottish Government, and if you could take us to 5 p.m, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Well, before today's debate, I asked myself if we might finally hear any plausible justification for the Internal Market Act. More than 4 years after it was imposed by the last UK government, without the consent of any devolved legislature, someone might be able to set out the reasons why it was necessary. Of course, we've heard no such arguments because there are no good reasons for the Internal Market Act. It remains utterly indefensible. No one seriously believes that the Act is necessary to protect intra-UK trade and Scottish jobs. This is a total nonsense. It is entirely possible to ensure that there are no unnecessary barriers to trade and have a system of workable, proportionate regulatory cooperation while at the same time respecting devolution and the powers of this Parliament. The Act was always driven by political calculation. It was not a policy necessity. Despite the people of Scotland rejecting Brexit, the previous UK government used it as a pretext to attack devolution and this Parliament's powers. They tried to pretend that the Act simply replaced European Union rules. This is also untrue. The European single market provides a well-functioning, balanced, proportionate and rules-based system of market oversight. Not at the moment. The Internal Market Act introduced an arbitrary, opaque and unaccountable regime where laws passed by a democratically elected legislature can be nullified on a whim, where decisions on matters of profound importance to the people of Scotland can be set aside at the discretion of an unaccountable minister in London. Presiding Officer, I've said I'm not giving way at this stage. I've got a lot to get through. The election of a new UK government last July on a manifesto commitment to reset relations after the deep damage done to devolution by the previous government offered grounds for hope. Yes, it did. However, the evidence so far suggests the new UK government either doesn't grasp the damage the Internal Market Act has done and is doing, or it simply isn't interested. To unilaterally rule out repeal of the Act, the position of the Scottish Government, the position of the Scottish Parliament, the position of the Scottish Labour Party, the position of the Welsh Government, the position of the Welsh Parliament, the position of the Welsh Labour Party is totally unacceptable. The new UK government has to think again. It has to commit to working with other governments of the UK to deliver a better, workable and agreed alternative to the discredited and the unworkable Internal Market Act. I wish to turn briefly to the points raised by members including Stephen Kerr and Rachel Hamilton. The first point I want to make is this. There is a misapprehension amongst some members of this Parliament, particularly in the Conservative benches, who do not seem to understand that there is a thing known as common frameworks. And these are the basis of dealing with internal market issues. That was introduced before the Internal Market Act. They've never been allowed to work properly. It is the point about why the Internal Market Act is utterly and totally superfluous and dangerous. To Neil Bibby, frankly, and Alice through the looking-glass logic, welcoming a UK Labour Party review which rejects the position of himself, of his party in this Parliament. It is utterly baffling. Lorna Slater reminded the Chamber of how the Internal Market Act has been used to overrule the Scottish Parliament without evidence, without justification, or without democratic accountability. And Willie Rennie was absolutely right to say that the IMA should be repealed. Strange, then, that the UK government ruled that out, despite that being the position of the Scottish Labour Party and MSPs across that side of the chamber. Incidentally, the position of 5 out of 6 political parties in this Parliament. George Adam made a powerful reminder about the dangers of the Internal Market Act, while Jackson Carlaw, in his usually interesting and enjoyable way, lamented much about the workings of devolution. But perhaps, on reflection, he might also acknowledge that the Internal Market Act does drive a coach and horses through the devolution settlement. Kenneth Gibson tutored those of us who don't appreciate the limits of devolution and those who choose to use the rhetoric of Scotland having amongst the strongest devolved parliaments in the world. You'd fail your higher modern studies if you were to write such a thing, no doubt. To Alex Rowley, who thought today's debate was depressing, but apparently didn't find it depressing that his party's position in the Scottish Parliament is being blocked by his own party at Westminster. That I found particularly baffling. Emma Roddick was right to point out that the IMA impacts across the powers of devolution. So it impacts on all the issues that Alex Rowley and others raised as being important. Faisal Chowdhury seemed content with the words of a UK consultation which rules out his own position on an IMA repeal, wanted to hear a Scottish Government contribution to the consultation. It's simple. Repeal the Internal Market Act. It's the position of this Parliament. It was the position of his Parliament, of his party. Why he has done a U-turn together with the rest of his colleagues is beyond me. And then he was followed by Martin Whitfield, who made reference to a reset. I agree a reset would be a tremendously good thing, but I do find it really, really odd that his party thinks that a reset in a relationship can be brought about by ignoring his own position, his own front bench's position. His own colleague representing East Lothian in the UK Parliament can ignore him on a matter such as this. I'm happy to give way to him and explain why he has U-turned on his own position.
Martin Whitfield.
I'm very grateful, President Officer. I'm very grateful to Angus Robertson to give way. And the tone and the attitude and the approach and the view that is being taken both in this speech and others, is that conducive to a relationship that I've heard from that front bench say is productive with the UK Government?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I say very gently to Martin Whitfield, who talked wistfully in his contribution about the need for cross-party cooperation. We had it. We agreed. The Scottish Labour Party agreed with the Scottish National Party, agreed with the Scottish Green Party, agreed with the Scottish Liberal Democrats, agreed with ALAPA, that in this Parliament we agree by clear majority that the IMA should be repealed. Sadly, it is the Scottish Labour Party which has given up on cross-party cooperation and is prepared to accept the ruling out of his position, his party's position, this government's position, this Parliament's position is utterly beyond me. And here's the most baffling thing of all. Every member of this Parliament knows that it is not difficult, if one is having a review, to consider the broadest range of options. Why then did his colleagues, why did Douglas Alexander, why did his colleagues in Westminster then decide that they were going to rule out his position, his own party's position? It's utterly baffling. It would have cost nothing to do it. They should have done it, but they chose deliberately not to do it. That, I'm sorry, is not a reset. Presiding Officer, an alternative workable system is, I believe, easily achieved with political will and with political imagination. We have the blueprint for a better system in the form of common frameworks. As has been noted, the UK Government itself proposes that common frameworks should be the principal means of managing regulatory divergence by agreement. But it has yet to set out how that would be achieved. The IMA applies automatically in nearly every case and with almost no exception. What scope is there for sensible, evidence-based engagement when the Act renders that engagement meaningless? What incentive is there to agree approaches that ensure regulatory coherence whilst also respecting devolution when the Act can simply nullify the effect of a devolved law? We need more than vague words. We need a recognition that the Internal Market Act is utterly discredited and a commitment to co-design a new workable replacement. Presiding Officer, the last UK Government used Brexit, a Brexit rejected by the people of Scotland, to launch a sustained and a systemic attack on the principle and purpose of devolution. The IMA is the most toxic element of that legacy. It must be consigned to the dustbin of history.
Thank you. That concludes the debate. That concludes the debate on protecting the powers of the Scottish Parliament. It's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of motion 16499 in the name of Paul McLennan on Renters' Rights Bill UK legislation. And I call on Paul McLennan to move the motion.
A formal move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. The question on this motion will be put at decision time. The next item of business is consideration of business motion 16519 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau setting out a business programme, and I call on Jamie Hepburn to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. No member has asked to speak to the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 16519 be agreed. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is consideration of business motion 16520 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau on a Stage 2 timetable. Any member who wishes to speak to the motion should press their request to speak button now, and I call on Jamie Hepburn to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. No member has asked to speak to the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 16520 be agreed. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is consideration of 3 Parliamentary Bureau motions, and I ask Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau to move motions 16521 on Stage 2 consideration of a bill and 16522 and 16523 on approval of SSIs.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. The question on these motions will be put at decision time, and there are 5 questions to be put as a result of today's business. The first question is that Amendment 16511.2 in the name of Rachel Hamilton, which seeks to amend motion 16511 in the name of Kate Forbes on protecting the powers of the Scottish Parliament, be agreed. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we'll move to a vote, and there will be a short suspension to allow members to access digital voting.